You're putting that woman above your own blood, above everything this family built.
The words landed in the middle of the Granger dining room like a stone dropped into still water, and nobody moved. Harlan Granger stood at the head of the table with his jaw set and his hands flat against the white linen, the way he always stood when he wanted people to remember who owned the ground they were standing on. He was 61 years old and had not been contradicted in this house in longer than most people at that table could remember.
The chandeliers above him were lit even though it was only 3 in the afternoon, because Harlan believed that darkness was something you pushed back,
Not something you waited out. Across the table, his son Holt Granger said nothing. He was 34, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of quiet that some people mistook for agreement. He was not agreeing. And beside Holt, standing slightly behind him because she had only just come in from the yard and hadn't had time to think about where to position herself, stood Mabel.
No, that was wrong. That was the other woman in the room.
The one they were arguing about was outside. Her name was Sylvie Drennan, 26 years old. She worked the fence line on the eastern edge of the Granger property and had been doing so for 2 years. She knew where the posts were rotting before anyone else did. She could read the sky the way other people read clocks. And Harlan Granger hated her with a specific polished hatred he had been cultivating since the moment Holt brought her to Sunday dinner and didn't apologize for it. The February in West Texas was the kind that didn't look like winter. The sky was pale and enormous, and the ground was hard but not frozen, and the wind came in low and steady across the scrub brush, pushing the smell of cedar and dry dirt into everything. Sylvie Drennan had come to the Granger Ranch 26 months ago with one duffel bag, a letter of reference from a man named Foster in Abilene, and the understanding that she was not there to make friends. She was not the first woman who had worked fencing and grazing land in that part of Texas. She was, however, the first one on the Granger property, and that distinction came with a particular weight that she'd felt from her first morning. The ranch hands had not been cruel, exactly. They had been careful. There's a specific way that men behave around a woman doing their work when they've decided to wait and see, not hostile, not welcoming, just watchful. Sylvie had grown up with that watchfulness. She didn't need their approval to drive a post into frozen ground, and they'd understood that within the first week.
Holt had understood it sooner.
She'd met him at the supply shed on her 3rd day. He was looking for a crescent wrench, and she was looking for wire cutters, and they had reached for the same shelf at the same moment, and he'd stepped back without making a thing of it. That was all. He'd said sorry, she'd said you're fine, and that had been their entire conversation for the first 6 weeks. What people misunderstand about the way things develop between two people who work the same land is that it happens slowly and then all at once. It's not a series of moments that build. It's long stretches of ordinary days, and then a single morning when something shifts, and you realize the shift happened a long time ago, and you just didn't notice until now. For Sylvie, the morning was in October, 14 months after she'd arrived. There'd been a section of fence down on the northeast corner after a bad windstorm, and she and Holt had worked it together through a morning that went from cold to hot in 2 hours the way October in Texas does. They hadn't talked much. They'd handed each other tools without being asked and read the same problems at the same time, and by noon the fence was up, and she'd looked at him and he'd looked back, and neither of them had to say what was in that look because it was already understood. She'd told herself it was a bad idea.
She told herself that for another 4 months.
Harlan found out in February, when the fence line gossip reached him through his foreman, a man named Bixby who had been loyal to the Granger family for 19 years, and who delivered the information with the careful neutrality of a man dropping a lit match from a great height. The first thing Harlan did was nothing. He sat with it for 3 days, which was unusual for him. Then he invited his daughter-in-law Adelaide, Holt's ex-wife, who had remarried and lived in Fort Worth, to visit for what he described in his letter as a family discussion. Adelaide did not come. She sent a polite refusal that managed to convey, without a single sharp word, that she wanted no part of whatever Harlan was constructing. The second thing Harlan did was call a dinner. There were 8 people at the table that Sunday. Harlan himself, Holt, Harlan's younger brother Cleve Granger, Cleve's wife Dorothea, 2 men from the Midland Business Partnership, and Harlan's eldest, a woman named Patricia who'd driven in from San Antonio that morning, without knowing exactly why she'd been summoned, but knowing her father well enough to be worried. Sylvie was not at the table. She was outside, finishing a check on the waterline, because nobody had told her it was a dinner worth attending. When Holt realized she hadn't been invited, something in him went still and certain. The conversation inside had been circling for 20 minutes before Harlan said the thing that silenced the room.
You're putting that woman above your own blood, above everything this family built.
Holt set down his fork.
I don't believe I've put her above anything, he said. I believe I've made a decision about my own life. Your life. Harlan said it flatly, like the words were a bad invoice. Son, your life has been this ranch since the day you were born. This land, this name, these partnerships.
He gestured at the two men from Midland without looking at them, and they shifted uncomfortably.
And you want to throw that into question over a fence hand. Her name is Sylvie Drennan. I know her name. Then use it.
Patricia, sitting 2 seats down, looked at her brother for the first time since dinner began. Something passed between them. Not agreement, exactly, but recognition. Cleve tried to ease the moment. He was younger than Harlan by 8 years and had spent most of his life performing that function.
Now, nobody's saying there's anything wrong with the girl. I'm not a boy,
Holt said. Don't talk to me like I need mediation. The table went quiet. Harlan looked at his son for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, which was always more dangerous than when he was loud.
If you bring her into this family, I'll restructure the trust. You'll get your share, but the operational control passes to Patricia and Cleve jointly.
You understand what that means? Holt understood exactly what that meant. It meant he'd spent 14 years running this ranch, making every decision that kept it solvent through a drought year and a market collapse and a water rights dispute that had lasted 3 years in federal court, and all of it would be handed to people who called him from cities to ask how things were going. He picked up his napkin,
folded it once, set it beside his plate.
All right, he said, and stood up. Sylvie was at the waterline junction on the south side of the equipment barn when she heard the door. She didn't turn around immediately because she had 2 more connections to check, and she was the kind of person who finished what she started. When she did turn, Holt was standing 10 feet away with his jacket on and no hat, which meant he'd left in a hurry. She looked at him. He looked at her.
What happened? She said. He made a choice, Holt said. So did I. She waited. I told him I wasn't going to negotiate my life against the deed to the property. He said it without drama, which was the only way he knew how to say anything. He can restructure the trust however he wants. That's his right.
Sylvie was quiet for a moment. The wind moved between them. Holt, her voice was level.
I didn't ask you to do that. I know you didn't. I'm not worth. Don't, he said it gently, but without any give in it. Don't tell me what you're worth.
That's not something I need your input on.
She looked away, across the yard, toward the fence line she'd learned in the dark, in the rain, in the heat of July that turned the air above the flats into something liquid and mean. 2 years of this land. She knew it better than some people knew their own names. Your sister's here, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd seen Patricia's car. Yes, she agree with him? Holt thought about his sister's face when he'd said Sylvie's name. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I think she's still deciding.
Patricia Granger found her way to the equipment barn 2 hours later. She was 40 years old and had her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, and she'd spent most of her adult life navigating the space between them. Her mother had died when Patricia was 19, and in the years since she had become, by default, the person who understood both Harlan and Holt well enough to translate between them, and who was exhausted by the work of it. She found Sylvie alone, writing in the maintenance log by lantern light.
You're Sylvie Drennan, Patricia said. Sylvie looked up. I am. I'm Patricia. I know who you are.
Patricia came in out of the cold and looked around the barn the way someone looks at a place when they're trying to understand what it says about a person.
She looked at the organized tool wall, the logbook stacked neatly by date, the horses settled and quiet. My father is threatening to restructure the estate, she said. I heard. He wants me to pressure Holt. Sylvie closed the log. Are you going to? Patricia was quiet. Then she said, my father has been using this estate as a lever to control people since I was 12 years old.
He took it away from Holt's mother when she didn't agree to the terms of the divorce. He threatened Cleve with it when Cleve wanted to sell the eastern parcel. She paused.
I've watched people bend themselves into impossible shapes to stay inside the circle of what he's willing to give. I've done it myself. Sylvie said nothing.
He told me tonight that you have no connection to this land, that you're a temporary person. Patricia met her eyes. I've been watching you manage that northeast fence line since October. I think you understand this land better than half the men who've been paid to care about it. Sylvie looked at her evenly.
With respect, Miss Granger, I don't need defending. I know, Patricia said.
I'm not defending you.
I'm just telling you what I've decided.
She straightened. He's going to ask me tomorrow to co-sign the restructure agreement. I'm not going to. Sylvie held her gaze for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Patricia almost smiled.
Because my brother doesn't tell people things. He just does them. Somebody should say it out loud.
The restructure meeting happened 3 days later in Harlan's study with a lawyer present who had been doing the Granger estate work for 22 years, and who wore the expression of a man watching a disaster he had warned people about. Harlan laid out the terms.
Holt's operational control would be suspended pending a review board consisting of himself, Cleve, and 2 outside parties. The review board would have authority over hiring decisions, including the employment status of anyone on the property. He did not say Sylvie's name. He didn't have to. Cleve signed. The lawyer witnessed. Then Harlan looked at Patricia. Patricia set her pen down on the desk without picking up the document. I'm not signing this, she said. The room shifted. Patricia, Harlan began. You told me this was about protecting the family's interests. Her voice was calm. This isn't that. This is about making Holt choose between loving someone and having the thing he's worked for. Those aren't the same. She looked at her father directly, and there was something in her face that had not been there before, a kind of tiredness that had finished pretending to be something else. I'm not going to be a tool in that. You're making a mistake. I've been helping you make yours for a long time, she said. I'd like to stop. Harlan looked at the lawyer. The lawyer looked at his hands. Without Patricia's signature, the restructure required a different legal pathway, one that would take months and require a court filing that would make the dispute a matter of public record. Harlan knew this. He had known it when he drafted the plan. He had not expected his daughter to be the hinge. The night that followed was the longest one Holt could remember since the drought year when they'd lost the east pasture. He sat on the porch of his house, not the main house, his own smaller house 300 yards north, and watched the dark settle over the ranch and thought about 14 years of decisions. Sylvie came out at 11 with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him and didn't say anything for a while. He's not going to let this go, she said finally. No, he could find another way to come at you. He could. She looked at the sky. Out here, away from town, the stars were unobscured and specific, each one holding its position. I grew up with nothing belonging to me, she said after a while. It wasn't a dramatic statement, it was just information. My mother worked other people's land my whole childhood. We moved 11 times before I was 18. I never had a thing with my name on it. She paused. I'm not going to be the reason you lose yours. Holt turned to look at her. In the lantern light from the window, he could see the line of her jaw, the particular stillness she carried like a coat. You know what I figured out, he said. 14 years of running this ranch. My name isn't on any of it, not really. His name is on it. I've been a caretaker. Holt, I mean that without bitterness. He looked back at the dark. A caretaker is an honest thing to be. But it's not the same as owning. And I've been confusing those two things for a long time. She was quiet. There's land, he said. Up near the Guadalupe. A parcel I've been watching for 3 years. Good water, decent grass, needs work. He looked at her. Different from this. Smaller. Real. Sylvie looked at him for a long time. That's a large thing to say. Yes. You've thought about this. I've thought about it more than I've let myself admit. The wind moved through the cedar and the horses shifted in the barn, and the night held everything the way nights in West Texas do, big and indifferent, and somehow also exact. I want to know about the land near the Guadalupe, she said at last. I know you do. 3 weeks later, Harlan called Patricia into his study again. She came without hesitation and sat down across from him the way she always had, with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and waited. He looked older. Not by the calendar, by something else. The kind of older that happens when a person realizes the architecture they built their confidence on was load-bearing in ways they hadn't planned for. I may have handled this wrong, he said. It was not an apology. Patricia did not expect an apology. She had stopped expecting apologies from her father when she was 19 years old and had made her peace with that fact years ago. You handled it the way you always do, she said, not unkindly. You decided what was right, and then you built a structure around that decision to protect it from being wrong. He looked at his hands. She's not what I expected. No, she rarely is. I went out to the northeast fence line this morning, he said, before sunup, to look at the work. Patricia waited. That section's been sound for 2 years, he said, better than the work before it. He paused. I asked Bixby when it was last right like that, he said since she took it over. Yes, Patricia said. That's what I've been told as well. Harlan was quiet for a moment. Holt's leaving, he said. It was not a question. He's talking to a man about a parcel near the Guadalupe. That's a hard start. He knows how to do hard things. You raised him that way. Something moved across Harlan's face that Patricia could not quite read. She thought, for just a moment, that it might have been the specific pain of a man who had used his best quality, his determination, as a weapon against the people it was supposed to protect. Tell him. He stopped. Tell him the water rights on the southeast corner aren't complicated. If he needs someone to review the Guadalupe deed, I know people. Patricia looked at her father. He was not going to say anything else. He was not going to fold the moment into something larger. He was going to offer a practical thing in the language of practical things, because that was the only language he trusted,
and she understood that this was, for Harlan Granger, as close to an open door as she was ever going to see.
I'll tell him, she said.
Holt and Sylvie drove to the Guadalupe parcel on a Thursday morning when the sky was doing something complicated with clouds and the temperature couldn't decide between winter and spring. The parcel was 340 acres. It had a creek that ran reliable 8 months of the year, a barn that needed one wall replaced, and a ridge on the north end that looked out over the whole spread in a way that made you understand the land all at once. They stood on that ridge for a while without talking. Sylvie had her hands in the pockets of her work jacket and her hair moving in the wind, and she was looking at the fence line along the property boundary with the professional attention she gave everything, already reading what was there and what was missing and what it would take. The east section's going to need complete relining, she said. I know, probably 40 posts at minimum, probably 60, he said. I was being optimistic. She looked sideways at him. There was something in her face that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one, a softness that she didn't deploy often, and that meant more for its rarity.
It's real, she said. Yes, it's ours to make. That's the word, he said. Ours.
Below them, the creek caught the light where it bent around a stand of cottonwoods, and the grass, such as it was in February, moved in the wind with a kind of patience that grassland has, the knowledge that the season comes around and the work of growing gets done in its time. Sylvie Drennan had grown up with nothing belonging to her. 11 moves before 18, borrowed rooms and temporary arrangements, and a particular skill at holding herself lightly in spaces that weren't hers. She looked out at those 340 acres and felt something she did not have an immediate name for, something between anchor and permission. She reached out and took Holt's hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They stood there for a long time on the ridge, in the February wind, looking at the real thing they were going to build from the ground up, on ground that was theirs, earned and chosen, the way the best things are.